Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other spectacular co-host.
Brian, hi.
Welcome Brian, how are you? Welcome to our living room.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
It is, I spent all day here and I'm a big fan of it.
How are you, Joel? How you getting on?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I was telling you I was pathetically excited today because I just had like a full 7 hours of sleep or something. It was like, wow, new tech.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling full of beans. I'm formatting cells and Excel spreadsheets that I haven't even looked at in months. Yeah.
I love it when you're feeling like rested, because you're like, everyone's feeling rested. Isn't this nice? Because you don't fully understand the distinction between what you're experiencing and what everyone else is experiencing. So it means that just you're like super peppy in the morning, and I was still asleep because I didn't get a good night's sleep because I was awake until all hours. And you were like, good morning, let me pull back this curtain for you, and would you like coffee now? And I was like, yeah, sure. But it was very nice. It was infectious, so it's okay. Yeah,
I understand the angle you're trying to take on this, but everyone else is just hearing that like I was in a good mood and make you coffee while you're still in bed. So
true. And we're getting a new dishwasher this week. I'm so excited.
We are, boo.
Our dishwasher broke in like January. I want to say it was like January. So we've been washing dishes by hand for the last 2 months. It's been awful.
Which I know probably sounds like very, very bougie or something.
Super privileged.
But
it's impossible to go back.
It was like, yeah, it is impossible to go back once you do it. It'd be like trying to put washing your clothes by putting it through one of those pressers that you ring through with a crank. But also, it's like we had so little going right in the world, and it's like, and now I can't even put my dishwasher on. So it was a real kind of, the last straw, as Niles once said on Frasier. So we're excited for that. But what we're most excited, superlatively excited about, is this week's episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is entitled All the Way.
It is indeed. All the Way was first released on October 30th, 2001. It was directed by David Solomon, who last directed Afterlife, and it was written by Stephen S. DeKnight, who last wrote Spiral. And here is your Buffy on summary. On Halloween, Dawn sneaks out to date cute boys and misbehave. The boys are actually vampires, and apparently sinister old man is killed by them. Buffy and Spike and Giles interrupt the attempted turning of Dawn. Dawn gets her first kiss from her vampire boyfriend and stakes him. Tara and Willow have a row about Willow's casual use of magic. Willow makes her forget it. That was actually not too bad. It was a bit structurally off. But
Lots going on this week, Halloween episode.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, slide over to the Bronze Banter, cast our silent spell, and discuss what we've been done here watching this week. And so I'm going to ask you to tell us a bit about this very interesting little film we watched.
Yeah, we watched Minari the other day, which it is a movie written and directed by Lee Isaac Chung, and it stars Stephen Yeun, Yeun,
of Walking Dead fame.
Yeah, who has been nominated for an Oscar for the film, and the film has also been nominated for a bunch of Oscars, including Best Film. It's about a Korean family who are trying to settle into life in Oklahoma. No, it wasn't Oklahoma. Arkansas.
Because I kept thinking Arkansas.
Yeah, where they'd previously been living in California, and before that, South Korea. Oh, South Korea, I presume.
You presume, I would imagine correctly, yeah.
South Korea.
1980s as well.
It's set in the 1980s, and it's a very oddly structured movie because it's reasonably plot light and quite vignette-y and quite like meandering, while building towards a beautiful moment towards the end and just having genuine like structure or genuine progression throughout. But it's about a family, kind of weirdly focused on the young son, I think would probably be described as the main character or the viewpoint character. Beautifully photographed and really touching, genuinely funny throughout as well. And
great music.
Beautiful music. I found it hard to
fault.
It was genuinely really, really good. I've actually been watching a ton of did the light just turn on? No, the sun just came out.
Yeah, the outside light came on.
I've been watching a bunch of like the Oscar nominations came out last week, so that was nice. And I've been watching a bunch of movies that I've been meaning to get around to because of that. Not because I'm a big Oscar person, really.
You know more about the Oscars than I do anyway. The average person, yeah.
Through knowing more about them, I think I dislike them more. But it tends to be a good place to get like specifically the best documentary, movies, they tend to all be worth watching pretty much every year, or like, you know, I always find the best supporting actor category to be usually full of great performances, and usually good like indication of what to go off and watch, if you get me. So I've been watching a bunch of like, you know, Oscar nominated films. So I watched like The Sound of Silence, and I watched just Sound of Silence is what it's called. And I watched what did I watch the other day as well? Oh, I watched Kajillionaire, which is not nominated for any Oscars, but was really, really good and very odd. Yeah, and what else did I watch? Oh, I watched Minding the Gap as well, which is a documentary from 2018, but was nominated for an Oscar for that year. And it was one of the best documentaries I've ever watched, I would say. It was genuinely great. It
has a real characteristic of films, which you tell me you love, which when you start describing it, you were like, it's a documentary about skating, but it's not actually about skating, it's kind of about domestic abuse. Yeah. And that sentence structure of it's about this, but it's not at all, is like a very like, you will love this though. Yeah.
It's so true.
Like being tricked into things.
Yeah, because the thing, like, I think to my credit, I will sit down and watch a documentary about skateboarding and just fully enjoy that.
Which reminds me, we have to buy a skateboard today.
Oh, do we today?
Well, ideally today.
Grand. Yeah, we'll do that. And yeah, I just thought it was really, really good. Of all those movies, I would say Minding the Gap is my recommendation to go off and watch. It's hard to watch, but also very light and also just very passionately made. And the guy who directed it, or who created it, because it's about his life as well as the people
the documentarian.
He's actually directing the Ocean Vuong novel On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. He's directing the film adaptation of that for A24. So that's gonna, like, I was kind of, I read that book for a book club with my friends, and I found it it was great in some ways, but also you could very much tell that Ocean Vuong he's Vietnamese American writer, but he's mostly a poet, and you could tell that his first novel he didn't quite figure out how to write the pacing of a novel, but it could turn into a great film adaptation, so we'll see about that. Anyway, that's kind of my rant about films.
Yeah, so it's been a very kind of gentle kind of, you know, things that would be in the literature section kind of watching. Yeah.
God, I fucking love film. I love movies. Movies are great.
I find you're a wonderful wonderful gateway to that, and a fantastic partner. I love you very much. But also, you have a real passion for like new films coming out, which I don't really share. Like I'm often excited to see a new film, but there's so many like classic films, and when I say classic films, I mean things from like the 90s that I haven't seen, that like I never really think, I think very chronologically, where it's like, well, maybe I'll watch a cool film that came out in 2021 once I've seen like The Graduate or whatever, which obviously isn't from the 90s, but like,
you've seen The Graduate.
I have, but at a point I hadn't. Just like a lot of this stuff I haven't seen.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's a funny one, because I tend to think the exact opposite about movies that I do about books. Yeah, in the sense that, like,
your hot take about books.
Usually I think that books are only worth reading if they've been published for 30 years or more, and the critical consensus has really firmed up about it. Because books are really dense and really difficult to summarize your experience with it, unless it's like a reasonably light book, you know.
I've always had this brain problem, which you're well familiar with, which is that there could be a movie that's 90 minutes long, maybe 2 hours, and like that's an incredibly long undertaking. I'd rather watch 4-hour-long episodes of Game of Thrones or something.
Yeah, no, I find movies, like, I mean, I sometimes forget this and I'll avoid watching a movie, but sometimes you just sit down and stick on a movie and it's like, oh, it's done now, you know? Like, I watched Fences the other day, which was like 2 hours long, and it zoomed by. I was like, oh, great, done. But yeah, Minari was really good. I would definitely recommend watching it. Probably not my pick for Best Picture in the Oscars this year. That would probably be Nomadland. But yeah, Minari is really good. Okay, and the other thing we've been watching loads of is Deadwood.
Yeah, so again, like kind of something other than Deadwood I was thinking of, but like, because I was thinking like I'm also watching The Clone Wars, which is a cartoon from 20 years ago. But yeah, with Deadwood, it's like, the hottest new TV show from, what was it, like 2003
2004 2006, yeah.
But yeah, if you're not familiar with Deadwood, Timothy Olyphant and every other actor you've ever seen.
Well, it's a two-hander between Timothy Olyphant and Ian McShane. Ian McShane,
who you will know from American Gods or from the John Wick film series. He's the owner of the hotel. But yeah, it's like Deadwood being the town, a town in the Wild West era of US history that'd be very associated with Wild Bill Hickok and that period of Western expansion.
Yeah, the gold rush and like lawlessness.
And like, yeah, everyone knows about Deadwood, but it's in the sense that I was like, maybe at some point in the future we'll actually put this on. I never thought we'd actually get there. And it's just like, it's a lot of fun, and it's like, it's very well written, as in like Shakespearean dialogue, much akin to what we like about Buffy in terms of just being confident in its dialogue and its characterization. Yeah,
and very communicative in its dialogue in terms of nuance and interpersonal interactions. It's very, very, very accomplished. Yeah. It's also the most cursed experience I've ever had watching a Blu-ray, because I got it on Blu-ray. I bought the whole series on Blu-ray for like maybe €13 a couple of years ago, and I was like happy out, you know. But I picked it up, and we hadn't watched it since then because I'd watched some of season 1 on DVD when it came out originally, and then I forgot to keep going. But so we put this on, and season 1 episode 4. For some fucking reason, the audio sync on the entire episode is like a second off. And it's like a known issue. And there are a couple of episodes like that apparently. And I have never been... Thankfully, we were drinking, so I was like, you know, able to just like vaguely ignore it. But it was one of the most aggravating things I've ever experienced in my entire life.
Yeah, because like if we watch anything that you have actual control over and it's out of sync by a fraction of a second, like the big lights come on, you know, everything starts getting fixed.
Of course. I mean, like, it's actually, it is the ultimate, like, so what happens to me when I have that experience is it becomes very uncanny valley, and I'm like, what movement, sound make voice? And I like suddenly start to feel like every sound is disconnected from its source, and I'm like, what is, like, you'll be talking at the time, I'll be like, oh, your mouth is moving, but is that the noise making thing? Anyway, it gets very distressing. So but it's really, really good, and Timothy Olyphant is like honestly great in pretty much everything, and he's
I think if you haven't seen Deadwood, if you like Buffy, you might like Deadwood. I think there's like some crossover just in terms of tone, or, you know, a very
playfulness as well.
Playfulness, like very recognizable characters. Like for a period piece with all these mad old like characters, is like we actually know who everyone is quite well. But yeah, so speaking of dead and in the woods, in this week's episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, we have the Dawn Halloween Adventure Hour. Very much so. What did you think of this week's episode, Brian?
I liked it well enough, but not a huge amount. This is the third and final of the Buffy Halloween episodes. So you had Halloween in season 2, you had Fear Itself in season 4, and then you had this episode, and it is by far the worst, because those two are great. You know, they're great episodes, undoubtedly, and this episode just doesn't really do much of anything.
It's incidentally Halloween, realistically.
And you know what I thought about this episode this morning when I was thinking about it and trying to summarize my experience of it? I was like, it's kind of season 7-y.
Yeah. Yes, actually, when I thought about the episode where
him.
No, just when I was thinking the episode where Dawn kisses a vampire, I thought it was in season 7.
Whereas a very similar episodes in season 7 where all the girls are obsessed with that guy, you know.
Yeah, is he dead or something?
He has a leatherback jacket on. Is that what it's called? Leatherback? Leatherman.
Leatherman, yeah.
He has a Leatherman jacket on, which makes women obsessed with him.
Very good.
Yeah.
But no, that being said, absolutely not the strongest Halloween episode, but like a fun little adventure, I thought. I thought Dawn, Michelle Trachtenberg, did a great job of carrying the episode by herself.
I think so too, except for that moment at the very end after she stakes him, and she's just there like emotionally looking away from the camera, and that's the entirety of her response, and it's like, oh, you underacted that a little bit, Michelle.
Yeah. But you know, it's probably far better than what you get on Hemlock Grove or whatever it's playing, you know, on TV these days.
It's true. Hemlock Grove, of course, a show that got cancelled after one season in 2013.
Do you know why I've never forgotten Hemlock Grove? It's because
Remember at the beginning of Netflix, it constantly just suggested it after everything.
I think if it wasn't the first, it was practically the first actually original Netflix production, and there was something quite like, exciting or at least like novel about like, wait, Netflix can just make it like it's so common now that streaming services networks produce their own content like this, but at the time it was really kind of revolutionary, I felt like. So
well, like, that was definitely the first wave, along with House of Cards, Arrested Development, Orange is the New Black. I think those were the kind of the front runners there.
Arrested Development being the perfect example of wake, so streaming services can just bring back shows that were on other things, and that being quite powerful. But yeah, I never actually watched Hemlock Grove because apparently it was trash. But in this we have Dawn very much very effectively moved beyond her childish kind of characterization, I think, and there is an interesting element of like really positioning the Scoobies as like older than her, and having moved out of this phase where like she uses as they kind of lampshade the round robin trick of like pretending you're in other people's houses while you kind of sneak out, which
Buffy and Willow and Xander actively did at one point during like an episode of season 2 kind of thing, which is such a short period of time ago realistically. I think there's lots of aspects of this episode which really flag that Dawn has taken Buffy's role on. Like there are a ton of parallels between Dawn's behavior and speech in this, like Dawn saying she's never stolen a lipstick, obviously being a callback to when she's never purchased any lipstick in her life, i.e. she's always stolen it. A callback to Buffy's first line in Becoming Part 1, I want to say, where she's like flashing back to where Angel is flashing back to seeing Buffy find out that she's a Slayer,
talking to Merrick,
and talking to Merrick, who's I think Buffy says, are you from Barney's? I didn't mean to take that lipstick basically. And then you have obviously there's the thing of the round robin, which they had also done, and Dawn kissing a vampire, I think is pretty Buffy. One of all the Wikipedias for this episode note that this is now all 3 of the Summers women having had an emotion or a romantic relationship with a vampire, and I was like, when the fuck did Joyce have a relationship with a vampire? And they're like, because Dracula took her out for coffee one time. She did fully have her coffee with Dracula. Which is pretty wonderful.
I think this is a very playful episode. I think it's very aware of those tropes, and I think it is brazen in how it portrays Old Man Kaltenbach as this like toy maker, like murderer, slash kind of like pedophile kind of vibes to a lot of it. It's like, come on little children, come in, Daddy's gonna make you a treat, and they kick me out of the toy factory for that thing I did, so but what I found, I was really paying a lot of attention to like when they turn on him, because they're like, I still don't feel, even when after he's killed, you have necessarily made clear that he was benign. It still felt like maybe he actually was going to do something weird, but incidentally a vampire also killed him. It
was bad communication in this, it reminded me most heavily in terms of Buffy of Witch, in which you see Amy throughout being spooky and scary, and it being a suggestion that like her mother is controlling her to some degree, or whatever, basically just this consistent misdirection. And it wasn't misdirection whereby after watching it the first time you're like, oh, this feels unfair, which is what this feels like. It's just like, well, I know this is not happening, so it just feels like why is he just playing around with some knives? There's no narrative reason to follow him in this situation.
Absolutely.
Where if you watch Witch again, you're like, oh, this is interesting, because if you on a second viewing you see how it's Catherine all along, and that's a cool narrative communication,
and that's what they're trying to do. Absolutely. No, it is brazen, kind of funny misdirection, lying in this, because in the opening scene where we're just focusing on him, he is doing perfectly normal things, but they play a sinister soundtrack. Like that is like an outright lie, but it's fun, and I think it's I wanted to ask you, and I think I mentioned this while we were watching, how soon after the film Scream did this episode come out?
Like 6 years.
Is it as long as 6 years?
I want to say Scream 1 was 96.
The reason I ask is because I think the two vampire boys in this episode are very specifically aping that the two spoilers for Scream
1996.
But the two villains from Scream, one of whom is demented and the other whom is kind of like
a follower.
No, I actually was saying the follower was demented.
Oh, really?
Well, like as in like the guy who plays
that guy's in everything. Yeah.
No, he's in
Scooby-Doo.
He's God, what's the name of the guy in Scooby Doo?
Oh, it's Shaggy.
He's Shaggy in Scooby Doo.
He
Matthew
is, yeah.
something.
I think it is Matthew something.
Matthew Landis or whatever.
But I remember him as being just kind of like a silly follower, and the other guy was actually like violently misogynistic.
No, he is. No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. The other guy, exactly like this, is actually sinister. But in Scream, the other guy is like a cackling hyena who's like, stab me, man, stab me again. You know,
Yeah,
so
sure.
he's actually like, I'm crazy. Yeah. I think that's the vibe we have here as well. So yeah, I enjoy it. I think it was
I remember in 2012 or something, me and our friend Paul sat you down to watch all of the Scream movies because you'd never seen them before because you were too afraid to when you were younger. And they were an absolute revelation for you. You were like, these have just been sitting here the whole time. These are amazing.
I think they stand up. I think I like all four of them, even Scream 4, which was all about webcasts, I think, webcams. And
is it not Scream 3 that's really awful and Scream 4 is a campy, silly thing?
If I remember correctly, I believe Scream 4 was when it was like Return to Scream.
Yeah.
It was about like it's the 2009 or something, and it's like now we do streaming. Yeah. Like they're all terrible in their own way.
They really are. Yeah.
But wonderful in others. Yeah, let's rewatch those soon. But yeah, I thought I didn't feel the awkwardness of thinking that they were actually trying to give us the young adventures of Dawn Summers. I think it was just Dawn was doing something in this episode, and so therefore I felt like, oh, okay, this is kind of like a funny insight into like what's happening, like the fact that like Dawn is portrayed as like the modern teenager when it's still like, yeah, but this was in 2002 or whatever. Yeah. So it feels like it's a weird juxtaposition. 2001 because like she doesn't even have like a cell phone, right?
No, I don't think so. I mean, like when they can't find her, they're like, oh, let's split up into groups.
When they can't find her, they're like, let's walk around town and hopefully if I'm in the meat district I might run into Willow. Like it's very kind of meet me by the old tree at high noon or whatever. I just think it's quite funny.
Yeah.
And yeah, so what do you feel about the actual kind of the underlying, you know, Dawn falls for a vampire kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't know.
She wasn't super put off by the fact that he was a vampire. She wasn't immediately like running and screaming from it.
Well, Dawn is a kleptomaniac with a death wish, Joel. So now you're right, and that's, to be honest, yeah, it kind of like, it felt like the actual vampire kid nature of it didn't factor into anything. You know, I don't feel like it had any resounding message of, oh, here's what it's trying to communicate about this situation. It just felt like kind of an empty premise of, oh, the boys are vampires, and like it didn't say anything about, like maybe it was trying to communicate something about predatory young men or something. It didn't really completely communicate that for me.
They weren't even super predatory. Like they were, but like in a real kind of like just in a vampiric kind of way.
And they also kind of just appreciated, or he kind of appreciated Dawn for who she was a little bit. He was like, you know, you're beautiful. You're so like, he was like, you're so edgy and cool. And like, you know, there's a little bit of like him actually
be my queen of the night kind of thing.
Liking that about her. And that was a bit, you know, it's like, okay, well that's sweet, I think.
Yeah. And I thought we already established early on, never kill a boy on the first date.
It's true.
It's right there in the title.
Yeah, and she did it. I think in so many ways, I think this episode exists to communicate a message about Buffy, which is to parallel the fact that Buffy is still a child in some ways. You know, that it's so recently that she was doing this, especially given the presence of Spike and a Halloween situation, which was like, I think this episode most closely relates to season 2, episode 9, whatever it was, which is Halloween, in which Spike breaks the vampire rules and terrorizes Sunnydale on Halloween,
All Hallows Eve,
and all that stuff happens. And Spike being here and reminding your man, or saying this to the vampires, being like, hey, you're breaking the rule, which is that we're not supposed to do this on Halloween, basically. Yeah, so it felt very, very much like a parallel to that, and kind of communicating that like Buffy's not ready for this stuff and unwilling to take the mantle of adulthood onto herself, which obviously is most specifically highlighted in the scene towards the end where she says to Giles not to go too hard on Dawn, which is just like wildly inappropriate, of course.
No, I 100% agree. I think it's a difficult juxtaposition where she does have to take responsibility, but also, of course, it's difficult. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the two other threads we run through the episode are one of which is Willow's deepening abuse of magic and her conflict with Tara, which leads to a pretty critical moment for us.
Yeah, it's really like it's very hard to like Willow in this episode. I think it's been building up nicely over this season to some degree, but like Willow in this episode, just there's no way to be on her side, you know. So obviously, yeah, she does start with some pretty like offhand symbol magic to conjure up some decorations for the house for Anya's and Xander's engagement party, which they are spontaneously throwing. Which I'm not sure what's wrong with me, but when we were watching it last night, there was a scene where she basically conjures it all into existence in a bit of bad CGI. I didn't really notice the difference because
you're like, wait, what happened? What are they saying happened? And like the whole room was filled with like streamers and party lights and stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, so and then the second instance, she is in the then basically her and Tara have a conversation about it, and Tara's like, you need to kind of like take a step back, and like there's worth in doing things like substantively as opposed to finding shortcuts for things.
Naturally.
And Willow says some really damning things, like she says, have you been talking to Giles about me behind my back? Which
the paranoia.
One of the things Mark Field notes about this is that he said is that Willow has pinned all her self-worth to her magic use. She thinks that that's what makes her powerful. She thinks that's what makes her worthwhile, and the only thing that distinguishes her from her younger kind of pathetic self. I'm not saying that she's pathetic, but I think she probably would see herself as pathetic. So this moment where it's very sad to be like, have you been taught? I'm not paranoid. Why would you say that?
Yeah. Who told you that?
Exactly. And then following on from that, at the end of that conversation, what I found very upsetting was when Dawn comes into the room to be like, I was just coming to check on where the chips are, basically. The French fries. And Willow says, it's fine, we're done here. Or this conversation is finished, or we're finished here, basically. Yeah. Unilaterally ending the conversation between her and Tara. It's very controlling, it's very manipulative, it's very dismissive. And then, towards the middle of the episode, when they're searching for Dawn, they're in the bronze, and Willow casts a silence spell over everyone so they can talk to each other. And we were talking about this. You're like, how would they have done this? How would they have isolated our voices in this situation?
In a production sense, yeah.
In a production sense. And I was saying, this is actually probably what this would have sounded like, actually acted. And that's what most scenes like this will sound like acted, because in those kind of crowd situations where you have your leads talking amongst a crowd where there's music playing, the standard for it would be that the extras are dancing with no background music. They're dancing in silence, and they're definitely not saying anything. If you see them talking in the background, they are moving their lips, they are not talking. I remember listening to an episode of Gilmore Guys where they talked about that specifically with the episode for Spring Break where the Shins are playing, and how they had, like, I think they had someone on stage, or on one of the extras was on that episode talking about it, maybe, and how awkward it would have been just to be like dancing back and forth without any music there. So basically that would be what that scene would have sounded like without the post-production of dropping in crowd noise, music, chatter, basically.
Fine.
Yeah.
So I think we have obviously the key thing at the end of the episode with Tara and Willow being
I was going to say, just quickly, highlight that Willow then suggests fucking insanely to find Dawn in this crowded room, which they have no reason to believe she's in, or no great reason, that she will transport everyone who's not a 16 or 15-year-old girl into a alternate dimension for a split second and then pop them back in. Like, what's wrong with her?
It's quite roundabout way to do it, as opposed to just being like, hello.
It's so worrying, and it's just so stupid, and it's just like, it's so clearly like, in some ways I was like, is that bad writing? Because like that kind of escalation is like bizarre. She hasn't done anything like that except for obviously bringing Buffy back to life. But like, bring some transporting people to another dimension, that's another level. Remember in like the last season when she transported Glory above Sunnydale, and she collapsed right afterwards.
Yeah, it's because she had no consequences, or she feels she's had no consequences from it. Yeah, so I think of the element of her thinking, oh, we talk a lot about consequences, but it's only consequences for people who can't do it as well as I do.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, self-exceptionalism, basically.
Yeah.
And then, at the end of the episode.
So she uses a flower whose name I'm sure we'll learn in a future episode.
I think it's just a thistle.
Thistle. Well, she thistles Tara, and erases her memory of the argument, which is like, which the show appropriately carries forward as like, this is a horrible thing to do.
It really is. Yeah.
To your partner. It's quite disturbing to watch them in bed down together. Like, well, just because it's two women together.
There's something
no, I need to be clear, that's a joke before we move on.
There's something quite disturbing about it in the sense that, like, it's abuse. You know, it's
mystical gaslighting.
Yeah, it's very, very, very clearly the actions of someone who has no concerns for the well-being and what's the word I'm trying to say? Self-determination and autonomy. Agency and autonomy of another person, where they, I've decided that this is not something that you need to know anymore. And it's very much different to the other things that Willow's done over the years, where things like her spell in not Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. What was the one where her Something Blue, where she fucks up everything, where she's trying to basically forget about Oz, and what she does is she tries to do that for herself and ends up backfiring it so that she does it to everyone instead. That's one level where she's trying to not manipulate herself, but she was trying to change her own situation.
Yeah.
In this situation, she is actively interfering with another person's memory and experiences. It's pretty fucked up. It's just like, it's absolutely indefensible.
And why are we if not our memories back?
Exactly.
Yeah, so not good. We're going to carry that forward, I think, in the future episodes. But it's definitely a dark moment for a main character as well, for Scooby.
Yeah, 100%. And then I think the last thread in the episode that is kind of interesting to pull at is the Xander stuff. Obviously, spoiler alert for later on season 6, but a lot of this presages where Xander kind of has to build up the courage to tell everyone that Anya is... or he and Anya are engaged. He does so after a successful day of commerce, and where he sees Anya dancing with Dawn,
with his future wife.
His future wife. Oh Jesus! And they tell everyone that they're engaged, and throughout the engagement party, Anya is telling people about her plans for their future and how hopeful she is for it, and he looks like he's going to get sick. It's just such straight dude nonsense.
Yeah, like, cannot be happy, so clearly, and so speaks so often himself about how he felt he had nothing going on, and a big part of his arc there for a while was that he felt he hit a rut, and people were moving on without him, and now he's like, but now I'm also having to do too much, and it's like, the problem's you, buddy. You're the problem here.
Yeah, I get you.
So we have like, Anya is genuinely charming and exciting and like lovely, and her life has changed so much, and she's like made like these huge adjustments to take on this human existence and has really committed to it. So yeah, it does feel like I don't know, Xander kind of doesn't really have any reason to be doing this. Yeah, it's pretty indefensible. Well, no, he does have reason to be doing it. He shouldn't be getting married to Anya. He's not good enough for her. He's not prepared emotionally or he shouldn't be getting married to someone he doesn't actually want to get married to.
Yeah, 100%. And I think in lots of ways, I think he and Anya are a great pair, and like, I can see a future for them getting married if she doesn't die. But he's not individually responsible enough or emotionally prepared to make that commitment to someone. And he should be realistic about that, but he's not, because he's a bastard. So,
on that note,
yeah. Okay, so we want to talk a good bit about the Angel episode for the week, which is Billy, which is so good, and really really relevant to I think we're gonna have to talk a lot about just like Joss Whedon and self-apologencia. What I'm trying to say there,
self-apologism.
Yeah, is apologencia a word? I can't remember.
It is now.
Great. So let's move on to the Buffy bits.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or into the dusting. Okay, I have a couple of Buffy bits for you. So Janice Penshaw here, who is Dawn's friend and who is mentioned later in the season but never appears again, is played by Amber Tamblyn, who was Joan of Arcadia, which was that like kind of like Touched by an Angel replacement on whatever network that was on. She's the wife of David Cross.
David Cross Canadian.
I also had this question the other day. You were listening to the same
thing.
Because
we watched it together, yeah. But I was like,
I'm not sure. And she's going to be in Why the Last Man, which is pretty cool. She's been in a bunch of things. She's in Sister of the Traveling Pants. She was in the Grudge opening scene, the US remake. Also set in Japan, bizarrely.
It was also with Sarah Michelle Gellar, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah. We should watch that. Have you not?
No,
we're going to watch it this weekend.
The shower thing.
The shower thing is terrifying. The rest of it's absolute trash. I believe she was in some other slasher. I think she was in The Ring as well, or The Ring 2 maybe.
Never seen that either.
Which is not a slasher at all. Sorry.
Never seen The Ring either.
Oh God, Joe. And I think that's. Oh yeah, and I would just note that like apparently so Mark Field reckons that the title All the Way is a suggestion of going all the way, i.e. sex in this circumstance. I'm not sure if I would read that as being like the entirety of the meaning of it.
It's not the entirety of the meaning. It definitely is one of the meanings because the two boys do talk about, he says something, if he doesn't say specifically that, he does say, are you going to go all the way with her or something?
Okay.
But he means turning her as opposed to having sex with her.
I found it a weak title.
Yeah. But then otherwise, I suppose like if I want to be generous to it, it's like, you know, can Xander commit to actually going all the way for the rest of his life with Anya and getting married, and Buffy's kind of half in, half out with the whole kind of taking care of Dawn thing, being the adult, etc. So there's a general sense of hesitancy,
lack of commitment. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm sure there's something to be said about Willow there too as well. But
yeah,
okay.
Things.
Do you have any fashion notes, Joe?
Yeah, I thought Willow's hair looked fantastic in this episode.
I really liked it too. I liked what she was wearing too. The kind of diagonal, almost 70s jumper she was wearing, which is kind of a varsity jumper. It was lovely. Well
styled, very chic. Big fan of it. I thought that Dawn was also dressed like quite cool in this episode, and quite like, you know, she had a couple of cat jumpers still, or cat t-shirts, but still it was kind of quite nice going out gear. Yeah. Which is always nice to see. And then otherwise I thought that we had I know that Giles was just in some very impractical shoes for the amount of running that he had to do. Like there was a lot of like tackling people while he was wearing like corduroys. We had a return of the Giles Merlin outfit as well, which I quite like, and we had Anya wearing a Charlie's Angels outfit, and she's like, I'm dressed as an angel, and it's like a Charlie.
Yeah.
Also, the entire episode Xander is wearing a pirate costume.
Yeah, and foreshadowing the fact that he is going to get his eye gouged out in the next season. I
will also point out that I know about old man Carlton-Box fashion, because he's not just an old man, he's like a time traveler. Like he talks like he acts and dresses and talks like it's currently 1945.
Yeah, he's E.J. Barnum from Deadwood, but from Blade Runner, in which he is J.F. Sebastian. Yeah, he's J.F. Sebastian.
Absolutely. I also enjoyed the notes that Spike seasons his blood.
Oh yeah,
which is disgusting.
I'm sorry, I never asked you for any Buffy bits. I just skipped past.
No, we're contributing them now. It's great.
Go for it.
And also the lampshading that Giles says he cleans his glasses all the time, so he doesn't have to look at all the weird shit they're doing, which I quite appreciate.
All the kids macking on each other. Okay. And then for death count, do you have a death count for us, Joe?
I did, and then I rejected your offer to hand me my phone. Yeah, so we actually have quite a murdery episode. So we've old man Kaltenbach who's drained by Justin. A number of we forgot this whole scene at the end on make a point where a bunch of different vampires turn up that are not. They have a whole clan of vampires that are not indicated or suggested early in the episode that exist. But apparently Giles dusks Zach, Christy, Maria, and Glenn.
Well done, Zach. Well done, Giles.
Yeah. Buffy and Spike crossbow and dust 3 vampires. Buffy decapitates a vampire with a car door. And lastly, Dawn dramatically sticks a pin in Justin and makes him go.
I think it was a crossbow, right?
Crossbow bolt, yeah.
Bolt, yeah. Okay. What is your rating for this episode, Joel?
I would give this episode 7.6 Great Pumpkins.
Yeah, tell me about it.
I not an all-time classic by any stretch of the imagination, but the three threads of Dawn does a thing, Willow does a thing, and Xander and Anya do a thing. I like them all. I thought there was good interactions between the group, and I was like, yeah, this is like a strong Dawn episode. In researching this episode, I saw notes about the fact that like Dawn was voted like around this time like one of the top most annoying characters on TV and all this kind of stuff, and it's like she just is not. Like she
doesn't have any reason to by this point. I think there are points in season 6 and 7 where she is deeply annoying. It's definitely not at this point.
So I enjoyed it, and I thought it had a nice kind of a rompy adventure episode feel to it. Great.
I'm going to give it a 7.0 kiss sluts out of 10. I thought it was fine in lots of ways. It certainly wasn't a bad episode. It was dialogue was written well, character interactions were good, there's lots of interesting kind of discussion around the characters and the implications and the progressing of the plots, but I found it drew on a little bit. I thought it was quite slow and difficult at times to watch. It's not difficult to watch actually, but I just didn't find myself I found myself drifting during it. It did have the tightness of some episodes, and it kind of just doesn't really. I remember last week we were talking, you're like, oh, what's the next episode? And I said, this one is the one where Dawn has a Halloween vampire thing. And I was like, I don't remember a full episode about that. And it's because this isn't a full episode about that. It's an episode about myriad other things. Anyway, 7.0, and I'm comfortable with it. You can't stop me. Let's move on to the Cordelia Chase. This episode was Billy.
Meaty. So this week's episode on the Cordelia Chase was Billy. It pulled together a lot of themes from this season, from the show, in kind of interesting ways. So essentially the plot is that the demonic human who Angel helped escape from hell for Wolfram and Hurt to save Cordelia is now at loose in the community. And he is essentially a partially demonic human who has the ability to induce men to be incredibly violent and misogynistic towards women. I know what you're thinking, right? Yikes, this is going to be a rough one. It's actually not, I don't think. I think it's a relatively it's quite well handled, because they set out and they say, this is the episode we're doing. We want to do it. We want to handle it well. We want to do it not necessarily respectfully as we're looking for, but like for the severity of the issues, treat it as horrible and as kind of violent and misogynistic as it is. So he's characterized as kind of the nephew of a Kennedy-like family, and there's like political connections there. And he's quite a sinister character in of himself, because he induces this by touch. So anyone who knows him is very much like trying to like stay out of his range and all that kind of stuff. And what it leads to is confrontations with a number of the core women. So you have Lila from Wolfram and Hurt is induced by what's his name? His name on the show, Daniel Day Kim, anyway, the actor, not the actor, but his character, beaks Lila because of Billy's touch. Wesley stalks Fred through the hotel
in an extremely shining moment.
Yeah, very The Shining. And Cordelia feels generally a responsibility that this is happening because she was saved, and there's a threat of whether Angel will turn on her as well, and have all these interactions.
Saved for she was saved from her really grotesque visions and being maimed by Angel freeing Billy, basically.
Yeah. 100%. So what it does is it creates, and I've touched on this a couple times before, it creates this tension between the idea that Billy presents as, and Wolfram and Hart presented as, all his powers do is bring out the primordial misogyny in all men, and bring out something violent in all men, and amplify it, so they harass, and a number of women are killed and kind of attacked in this episode. And other parts of the episode, including, I feel, Freg's interpretation at the end, is that no, this is something that Billy does to men, and definitely induces them to do this, but that it's not representative to say that Wesley has this hatefulness for Fred and this violence somewhere within him, and that what Billy does is projects his own avowed misogyny and psychopathy onto men and interprets it in that way. What the turn it gives is that for both Lila, Cordelia and Fred, and Wesley in particular, they all turn fantastic performances in this episode. Wesley and Fred running and stalking through the hotel, the interactions, the tension when Wesley initially starts to turn sexist and controlling, and then hits her and then chases her, and the way he speaks to her and her trying to avoid him, and all of that is genuinely horrific and tense, and kind of a very good two-hander. And then we have Lila eventually, despite all this and despite, you know, wanting to represent the wolf from her side, she is the one in the end who shoots Billy and kills him because it's his fault that she was kind of attacked. And for one of the main opportunities in the series, we have Cordelia really take things into her own hands and say that she is going to get Lila to fix this and is going to kill Billy because she doesn't want to be responsible for this. So there's really a lot to it.
Yeah, the I think one of the saving graces of the episode, and I think it wouldn't have worked otherwise, is the fact that Cordelia actively takes agency onto herself in a way that she hasn't done in this season or the series, really, in lots of ways to this point. In a lot of ways, she's been afflicted in this show, you know, and rarely able to take matter into her own hands. In this episode, she has Angel train her in some combat and everything, which is a real turn for Cordelia, and I think a very necessary turn in the sense that all the men in this show have or in the Buffyverse have a natural ability towards physical combat. Giles can hold his own in situations.
Even Giles knocked out a vampire in this week's episode and stuff. Punched him,
and he staked two vampires back to back. Xander tends to deal well. You know, give him a bat or something, he'll usually do pretty well. Which is not the case for women. Usually, you usually give them projectile weapons or whatever. They certainly don't seem to go, specifically in Angel. Women rarely go seeking justice or action, and it was good to see Cordelia be given that agency in this situation. I thought it was really good. Yeah, and Wesley as psychopathic. I'm using that phrase literally in this instance. Misogynist is fascinating. The episode is kind of mixed in its messaging about what is going on here. I don't think it's very clear by the end of the episode what has happened ontologically because you also have Angel, who essentially doesn't get affected by Billy's misogyny because he says he has dealt with all that a long time ago. So that seems to directly contradict what Fred understands with Wesley.
Yeah, I do think there's a slight plot armor for Angel in either interpretation not being effective. He essentially says even when he was Angelus that it was pain and pleasure he's interested in, not actual hatred. Which is what? That doesn't make a lot of sense.
There's also I prefer that interpretation because if you're saying that, you know, anyway, no, actually, I don't really. But I kind of also don't like the Fred interpretation there in some ways, and I think it's totally well done and in no way irresponsible what Fred communicates at the end of the episode. I think the conversation is a good one to have throughout the episode. I think it's well handled, but I do think that there's probably something strong to be said about the fact that if what you're communicating is all men are misogynistic to some degree. You know, there is some misogyny in all men because it's deeply ingrained in our culture and our thoughts. It's that thing of people who are oh, I don't have a racist bone in my body. It's are you sure? Because well, not are you sure? You do, because you were taught from a very young age that people who are black are different, people who are brown are different, etc. And there's a little bit of racism or misogyny within your actions, especially when unlooked at, and to suggest that you've suddenly grown past that or somehow have eradicated that from your existence when it afflicts so many aspects of everyone's lives is immature and naive.
Yeah, I feel like I'm least comforted by Angel's role in this episode where he's oh no, I'm one of the good ones or something like that, essentially. Because he specifically if someone has actually acted misogynistically throughout their history, it's Angelus and Angel in different contexts.
Angelus, who specifically stalked, murdered, or tortured and murdered women, actively, specifically women. And I think that Wesley's reaction towards the end, where he's horrified by himself, horrified that existed within him, and removing himself from the situation to give the people around who, like specifically Fred, who he feels like he has damaged irreparably and wants to give her the space to heal, it's appropriate. And her saying, listen, I know that wasn't who you are. That's also, like, I know that's not what you are about, or that's not, that doesn't speak deeply to your character. I think that's an important, that's a generous response, but it's not, like, you know, I don't think, anyway, I think, you know, I think there's, if the show had gone another direction where it was saying that, like, Fred should apologize to, or should have Wesley welcomed back, or should, etc., that's a completely different story, like, you know, because that would be irresponsible. So it's a balancing act. So I think it's done reasonably well.
Exactly. Yeah. I think because of that, I think you're right. It is, I think ultimately, I think what we have from this is it is kind of unclear what ontologically is happening, and maybe that is like sufficient insofar as there is something, you know, Angel thinks that the reason why he wasn't affected was X. It doesn't mean it's true. Billy thinks what he does is Y, and that doesn't mean it's the case either. And I would agree. I don't think the show or the episode says that Fred should apologize, not apologize, but should forgive
him.
But she does, and that's also an option she has. So I think this could very easily have been an episode where, as a viewer, you were invited to kind of like enjoy the violence, or like enjoy the spectacle of like this horrible thing. And I really don't feel that's what it did. I think it really gave space to be like, we are going to show different versions of this and show our characters interacting with it, and we're not going to revel in it. I think particularly the stuff with Wesley, where the initial conversation is just very easily segues from normal conversation to him just like correcting her and adjusting her in a way which is quite controlling, and then it escalates. Was very uncomfortable and was very well acted. And I don't know, I think that it was an example of it using its genre, and again the genre of taking actual things but amplifying them in a fantastical way to make a point or to illustrate an interaction. I found myself, like, through the episode, I was thinking a lot, you know? And it gave the women in the show quite a lot of opportunity to demonstrate their own strength, which is an odd way of putting it now that I've said that out loud, but kind of like, they really are the drive. My point is, they're really the driving force of this episode. They're not a prop for the episode. Yeah,
no, absolutely. If this was an episode about misogyny where the men fixed it, where etc., like, I mean, women being able to take action in the situation, very strong, and men seeing themselves as being responsible, also strong. So yeah, I think it was a weird watch in the wake of the Joss Whedon stuff, knowing that, like, at the time he was actively harassing Chris McCarpenter, the person who in this episode has to deal with the repercussions of the deep misogyny in men, and then another actor being hit by a man, another actor being beaten to a pulp by a man. It's just like, I mean, listen, I don't think anyone thinks that Joss Whedon is like condones violence towards women in any way. I don't think that's his brand of misogyny. I think his brand of misogyny is much
we've no reason to
exactly
that I'm aware of to think that.
No, I think his brand of misogyny is much more around his own deep embedded egotism, honestly. You know, women are secondary to me, Joss Whedon. Anyway, but it was just odd because, like, I don't know, it's a hard lesson to try to take from the person who's delivering it. It made for a severe what's the phrase, the psychological phrase, cognitive dissonance. Yeah,
but that being said, like, this is a great example of showing that what was Joss Whedon's overall production. Like, he wrote 2 scenes in this episode, but otherwise did not write it, you know?
Okay.
But yeah, I think what I would say most with this episode is, if I was to teach a class on this, it would be one I would show, and I would be like, I want to talk about this. I want to see what people think about this, because I think there's something to it. So yeah, I would probably rate it, and I would give it 8 failed feminist gestures.
I was going for 9 failed feminist gestures.
I have been thinking 9, and then I thought maybe you might think that was too high.
Oh, okay, fair enough. No, I thought it was really good. I thought it was the best episode of season 3 so far, and it's been a really strong season. So. is it the best episode of season 3 so far? I can't remember what other highlights that there have been. There haven't been any really.
There
big
haven't
highlights.
been like named episodes where like the name of the episode. Yeah,
that's fine. That's fine. Like I would say it's up there with Are You Now or Have You Ever Been? I think that was also a 9. I think I Will Remember You was probably a 10. I think 5 by 5 was probably 5 by. No, that was the Buffy episode.
Okay, that's fine. I'm gonna revise my score to a 9.
Okay. I think the Faith episodes were the first Faith episode for me was probably a 10. I can't remember if I gave it a 10 at the time. I probably should have. And I Will Remember You, also 10. Anyway, I would say this is 9. I'm comfortable with that.
Great.
Okay. Is that everything?
Everything for this week, yeah.
Great.
Okay, Brian, well, thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone, for
You're welcome.
For joining us. It's great to have you here with us. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please let us know. Tell your friends. Tell the crazy old man who lives in the corner house of your street.
He didn't live in the corner house. He lived in Buffy's house, basically.
He did. He lived on Buffy's set. Stay safe. Stay well. Enunciate your sentences. And we will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
See you.
See ya.